And we are also delighted to have another ambassador of India to Nepal, Manjeev. And, you know, Shakespeare wrote 500 years ago, the troubles come in battalions. That's precisely what happened in Nepal in the recent past. Gets assassinated, his brother takes charge, and then from a Hindu majority Hindu state, the only one in the world, becomes a secular democracy, and then Maoists come, and you now have a Maoist as the prime minister of that country. And there have been a lot of changes, and instability is still going on. So it's a very interesting kind of situation in our neighborhood. And to share their thoughts with us, we have this panel of distinguished personalities. Before we invite them to express their views, may I request Simran to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Venkat. Thank you. On the panel today, we have K.V. Rajan, who is a former member of the Indian Foreign Service. He retired as Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs in the Government of India. He comes with nearly 40 years of diplomatic service experience, and he served all over the world, which included in the capacity of the head of mission to places like France, US, Zambia, with concurrent accreditation to Botswana, Angola, Namibia, and South Africa. He has also the distinction of being India's longest serving ambassador to Nepal to date. That is, he served from 1995 to 2000, and then subsequently in various other capacities. His own expertise on Nepal stands, and his understanding of various aspects of India-Nepal relations. He is a frequent speaker in India and abroad on international issues, and is the author of several articles on foreign policy issue for leading publications. And he is also the editor of an anthology of essays by distinguished senior former ambassadors. We have with us Atul K. Thakur, who is a policy professional, columnist, and writer with specialization in the interface of economics and politics. His interest in writing and research is diverse, and he is an alumnus of the Banaras Hindu University and Pondicherry University. He has worked across sectors and in fields of public policy and affairs, management, think tanks. And in 2013, he edited India since 1947, looking back at a modern nation. And he has also written extensively for papers like the Kathmandu Post, the Hindu First Post, and many others. We have with us Manjeev Singh Puri. He's also a former ambassador of India to Nepal and chair the India-Nepal Center at PhD CCI. He holds an MBA and he did his BA in honors in economics from the St. Stephen's College in Delhi. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1982, and in the course of his diplomatic career, which was spanning over 36 years, he served in different capacities in Indian missions abroad. And prior to becoming India's ambassador to Nepal, he served as India's ambassador in Brussels and as ambassador and deputy permanent representative of India to the UN in New York from 2009 to 2013. We welcome all of you here.
Thank you, Simran. May I now request Ambassador Rajan to tell us about the story behind the writing of this book, his experiences in Nepal, and the Nepalese habit of playing the China card, etc., etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. At the outset, Mr. President, I must thank you for your interest in encouraging the joint venture that Atul and I got into and having this meeting at a venue which we have visited many times, but it's always a special pleasure to come here when a friend like you is the president. Thank you so much. I must also, at the outset, thank Atul for having prodded me into getting into this joint effort. Otherwise, I was all set to finally retire, put my legs up, and head for the sunset. But he kept saying, look, you've got all these experiences, you've got all these thoughts. So why don't you he's put his heart and soul into it. Like me, he also has some very special feelings for Nepal. So I'm delighted about that. And I'm especially delighted that my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Manjeet Puri, is here. It's good of him to spare the time at short notice and join us. I really value his presence. And thank you very much, Madam, for that introduction. Now, I'll come straight to the point. I just need to a lot of things that one can say on a subject like this. Now, considering the subject that we have before us today, the good news about India-Nepal relationship is that it is a unique one. It is a beautiful one. The civilizational, the religious, people-to-people relations, etc. There's really nothing quite like this between any two neighboring countries in the world. Nobody can touch it, not even the Chinese. They can do nothing about it. The so-called roti beti relationship, it's a familial relationship which nobody can touch. Now that is the good news. The not so good news is that there are trends today. We live in a very difficult, very uncertain, and very dangerous world. And there are trends today. Um, there have always been trends like this, but I think these trends are particularly strong. Uh, and there is a legacy of the past. Together, they have the potential to derail the bilateral relationship in a much more serious way than before. And there is a possibility, a small possibility, of the cultural understanding, the people to people factor, etc., which has been a silent pillar of strength. Whenever there were serious hiccups in the past in the relationship, that this particular bond might increasingly lose its effectiveness in curbing the negative trends which might suddenly explode in the relationship. Now, there is a great deal of opacity that surrounds foreign policy in many countries. You do sit down. Um, so there's so much of opacity, so much of lack of transparency that most people, including journalists, rarely come to know what is actually going on behind the scenes in the so-called corridors of power. Why do major upheavals take place in a country or between nations? Now, foreign policy is not even a subject of serious discussion during an election campaign. Of course, there's a slight departure from this in recent days. We've seen how the Kachativu issue between India and Sri Lanka has been raked up in a fairly strong and very big way. But as far as Nepal is concerned, I think the opacity has been almost complete. And most people don't know why certain things have been happening between India and Nepal. Surely people are entitled to know, maybe later, if not sooner, as to why, in spite of all the good intentions that India has had for the last 70 plus years towards Nepal, with which it is supposed to enjoy a special relationship. Uh, Now, this phrase special relationship is used only by India. It used to be the pet phrase in the good old days, but now only India uses the term special relationship. The Nepalese never use it. Now, why on earth is it that in Nepal, the land of Pashupatinath, the birthplace of the Buddha, the birthplace of Sita, whereas Prime Minister Vajpayee said when he went there on one of his visits, he said every pebble has the name of Lord Shiva engraved on it. Why is Nepal such a foreign policy migraine for many Indian diplomats? Uh, why is it the regular source of the most serious anti-Indian feeling perhaps in the region. Of course, there is now competition from countries like the Maldives, but I think Nepal remains one of the biggest question marks in the region. Why should so many things that have happened uh, be a mystery, both in Nepal and in India? Uh, the full background to the terrible tragedy, for example, that struck Narayan Hithi Palace on June 1, 2001, in which King Birendra and his entire family were massacred, that still remains a mystery. I happen to be one of the few people still alive who know something about the background, about what was happening. Nobody wants to talk about it. And I wonder why. Because there must be some end to the mystery that surrounds events like this if it is linked up with a certain international game. Uh, uh, and that is one of the things that was in my mind. What was India's advice to the plain loads of political leaders who came to Delhi seeking advice from India when, for example, the decision had to be made about whether to bring the Maoists on board or not, whether to end the monarchy or not, etc., etc. Everyone knows that India did play a role because people were coming to India for advice. And yet, very few people actually know where India stood on all this. Um, of course, the reason for one of the main reasons for the uh, regular anti-India sentiment that you see in Nepal is the big country, small country syndrome. It has much to do with anti-Indianism, but there are other reasons too, I would submit. And an honest introspection on both sides is needed so that the two countries are not forever condemned to a relationship of two steps forward, one step backward, to the detriment of the interests of people. Surely people should count much more than anything else in the foreign policy machinery. The fact is, to my mind, that the big country, small country mindsets are complicated by other factors. For example, there is a tendency among Nepali political players to consult India and seek its advice, even on purely internal matters. And unfortunately, there is also an enthusiasm on India's part to give advice, sometimes even when it is unsolicited. And from there onwards, these are small steps, unsolicited advice, expect the advice to be followed, prod the hesitant and unwilling among the advice recipients to follow that advice against their own better judgment. Now, this has been happening, but not in full public view. Another complication to my mind has been that ever since India's independence, there have been two other competing priorities. Um, on the one hand, there was a commitment to strengthen Nepal's democracy, development, and international identity in every way possible, as speedily as possible. On the other hand, there was a feeling that there was a worry about China, the China factor. China had already annexed Tibet, and there was that worry. And there was a constant worry about the implications for India's security if there was no calibration on the democracy that was being that Nepal was being allowed to enjoy. Um, Now, India has tried just about every trick in the diplomatic book with Nepal to create trust, but it has really not worked. Nehru was generous to a fault in building Nepal's first roads, airport, hospitals, university, secured its admission into the UN against the wishes of the United States. This was followed by other prime ministers, each with his own approach. Gujral had his famous doctrine of non-reciprocity. Uh, Narasimha Rao had his twin pillar approach of supporting both monarchy and democracy, which seemed to work for some time, but that was overtaken by the Maoist insurgency. Now, uh, nothing has really worked uh, in the case of Nepal, and we have to try and see what can be done in the months and years ahead so that the two countries can be on a steady trajectory of bilateral relations. Um, I have to say that, India has tried to draw red lines as far as Nepal is concerned, and Nepal, I think, has always objected to any kind of red line because it values its sense of sovereignty and sovereign space more than anything else. And we know that, for example, when the Maoist insurgency was uh, taking place, the Maoists were fighting from their jungle hideouts in India. There was a nexus based in Pakistan of smuggling, terrorist related, active uh, in Nepal, misusing the open border in order to create all kinds of activities aimed against India. And the Maoists were watching with some interest. Of course, thereby hangs another tale. But there were a series of events which took place, culminating in the hijacking of the Indian Airlines flight. And it was only when uh, the nexus was exposed and tighter border controls were introduced that uh, these activities could be curbed. Uh, the whole point is that if today there is an expanding Chinese footprint to an alarming level in Nepal, and even the other day there has been a change of government in Nepal, which essentially means that it is advantage China again. China is very serious about undermining India's influence in the neighborhood. And India has to take it seriously. There is no choice. Unfortunately, Nepal is in an unending transition, and there is going to be chronic political instability. There are other problems in terms of governance, etc. And I cannot but recall my own experience in the 90s when there was a similar situation when bilateral relations were very good. We had excellent relations with the king at that time, with the political parties, all of them. Cooperation was based on consensus, on trust building, on consultations across the political spectrum, and nobody there had any sense of insecurity. But then the great game involving the smuggling, narcotics, terrorist related network took over, taking advantage of the political instability. And I worry about Great Game 2.0 again becoming active, taking advantage of an unstable situation in Nepal. So India cannot afford to be complacent. In recent times, and I think Ambassador Puri will be able to brief us on this, there's been remarkable progress in connectivity projects, road, rail, air, inland water transport, in areas like people-to-people contacts, business, cultural exchanges, innovative tourist circuits, education, health, etc. There is also a welcome trend towards depoliticization of relations with India. Hopefully, this will continue. The consoling thought, and one of several lessons I learned during my Kathmandu tenure, is that if India plays its cards well and does not repeat the mistakes of the past, at the end of the day, no Nepali can be anti-India in a profound sense of the term. There's just too much of bondage with India. And it's a question of how you manage that anti-Indian. Because you can have the same king, the same prime minister in Nepal, who is considered to be staunchly anti-India, with one set of, let us say, diplomats, bureaucrats, prime minister in India, who suddenly becomes pro-India with another set and helpful and friendly towards India. So building trust and a sense of security among political players, whether they are in power or not, giving a sense of ownership of positive developments to all leaders by consulting them in advance is often the best basis for a steady trajectory of ties, including managing national interests if and when the Great Game 2.0, uh, commences. Maybe it has already commenced. Uh, for a small neighbor of a huge country, the style of diplomacy matters as much as its substance. I don't know if Ambassador Puri will agree with me or not. So I think to end my brief presentation, what can I say except that the new government that will take charge this June has its work cut out for itself in Nepal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Rajan. May I now invite Atul Thakur.
Thank you, sir, for having us here. It's a real delight. First of all, sir, thank you very much for being the inspiration of writing this book. This is, light in weight, but not so light in substance. And sir, for being, a source of consistent encouragement. Sir is heading India-Nepal Center at PHDCC as the chair. I serve there as the secretary, and sir happens to be the founding chair of that bilateral think tank. So I'm sitting between two stalwarts. And just now we heard a memorable speech from Ambassador Rajan, which I should be archived for the benefits of coming generations as well. So I have not much to add on what he has already said, but a few points. If China has its advantages in Nepal, so India has its own advantages as well. And somewhere we don't need to be, as secured about the growing outreach from the northern neighbor, because Nepal has tested its ground. Nepal has tested the viability of having its deep relationship with China. Even in troubled times in 2015, when earthquake came there was sort of disruption near the borders as well for some internal reasons in Nepal. And as far as people-to-people relationship is concerned, that is very much intact. That is very much going to prevail even in the coming times. But Nepal is a country which is full with hiccups at political front. Even its economy is at tailspin now, not doing so well. But again, it's not going to meet the fate of Sri Lanka for sure, because it has earned the goodwill. It's a sovereign, conscious country, no doubt, and it should be, because it was never ruled by any foreign power rule, unlike us. So, foundation of relationship is strong. This book is divided into three sections, and we carefully decided to go this way. And our publisher and editor and good friend Premanka Goswami was with us in conceptualizing it. The first section reads like a thriller. If you will read it, that's completely anecdotal, written by a veteran, Ambassador K.V. Rajan, which is, I will say that is a work of lifetime. Each and every line is a special. Read it carefully. Remaining two sections we have written jointly, and that also somehow, reflect that whatever I have done on Nepal in the last 15, 16 years. So this is not a quickly written book, though we compiled it like a book, but this is a kind of document of our experiences about complexities in Nepal, complexities in India-Nepal relations. Everything is good, but troubled at the same time. But notwithstanding all the challenges, we are very much sanguine that India-Nepal bilateral relationship is still strong. It is it is going to brave the challenges, and there is no reason that we should be this should be sounding negative about the developments which are taking place between the two countries. Political changes have been taking place there more beyond the proportion as well after the end of monarchy. Sir has written in detail in the first section about the reason that changed the course of history in Nepal. IC-814 hijacking followed by royal massacre. Many things which have been not into public now are being told in this book. So the first section is full with revelations. Another two sections are also keeping some arms and arsenals of very high importance. I will urge all of you to read, engage into the discussion because of opening remarks have been said so beautifully. I don't have much to add here. But the book is deeply researched and lucidly narrated, no doubt about it, because I'm not just one author of the book. It's co-authored with Ambassador Rajan. So somewhere I am also giving him good good point of doing it, especially with the first section. My urge is you all please read it, and we'll be very happy to engage in the discussion. I will request Ambassador Puri to kindly present his views after that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Very kind of you to invite me, and Ambassador Rajan, mentor to many of us, me in particular. Atul, thank you very much. I'm delighted to have graduated from that chair to this place. Thank you very much. Just a few weeks back, I was sitting there and observing another friend of mine who was releasing a book on Kabul. Incidentally, I must tell you this little story. Nepal and Afghanistan are these two wonderful elements of the East India Company and later on the British Empire in the subcontinent. They were independent. They were sovereign, independent entities right throughout the Raj. It's a different matter who exercised how much. The Indian Army patrolled the streets of Beijing. That's a different matter. But they were sovereign entities. In fact, let me tell you this. In 1947, when pursuant to the India Independence Act, this division of assets between India and Pakistan was taking place. Let me tell you something very interesting. The huge British compound in Kathmandu went to India, and the huge British compound in Kabul went to the Pakistanis. People don't know this. There are so many histories. But Ambassador Rajan in the book has written about British activities. Today we will call it perfidy of various sorts of what happened 200 years back and which continues to inform us. I must tell you something else. In 1769, when Nepal, as we see it today, by and large, was formed, because Prithvi Narayan Shah, the Gorkha king, was able to capture everybody else and not bring them under the rule of Gorkha, but move to Kathmandu. This is about 100 years before Garibaldi and Bismarck, by the way, a sort of a unification. Now, let's listen to this. Very soon after this, they came into contact with the East India Company, which knew there was a threat. So the first time, the Sugali is a much later thing. 1790s, there was a war that happened, and the Brits won the war, but they recognized that this was a unique kind of territory. And I don't know if many of you know, but the Nepalese had consulates in whatever form you call them in Calcutta from those days onwards, late 1700s onwards. So there is this nation statehood, which I'm afraid here in India very often we in the foreign ministry figure it out, but many others don't tend to. But nation states are quintessentially so. And all I want you to do is to refer to the international news telecasts, newspapers, etc. in the last 2 years. If you had any doubts about what nation states do and who are close neighbors and how things work out, there's a wonderful example, perhaps as good as India-Nepal, which is in front of all of us and so on. But I'm not wanting to get into India-Nepal relations and so on. If I write my book, I'll have a perspective to tell you. But I want you to read this book for something quite interesting. Some things and nuggets which perhaps you won't hear and see of. I told you the first one that, this behavior on the part of the Nepalese political leaders in particular, but also at a level of people in a certain manner, at least in Kathmandu Valley and today all over Nepal, is a product of what? Why is it so? Many of you must be having Nepalese friends in India. Did you know that one of the largest homeopathic company in India is owned by a Nepali? Perhaps nobody would have known. How many of you know that one of the largest equity partners of the Tatas in the Indian hotel companies is a Nepali? There's so many other factors. We just don't know. And the way they play it in India is wonderful. If you go to Bangalore, you go to Hyderabad, there are huge Nepali communities quietly, like the rest of the people from India, beavering away in the IT sector, doing very well. Several are CEOs doing all sorts of things. Nobody even knows. But life goes on. This is the beauty of this relationship. But what I want to point out to you is read the book for some of these very interesting telltale signs. I drew your attention to this aspects of what the Brits did in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and how it is impacting us today. Ambassador Rajan has very nicely sketched so many of those aspects in the first section of the book. It'll give you a new insight to why of the India-Nepal relations. He then very lightly alluded to something else. Now, I don't see any very young people here, but you guys remember this IC 814? I don't think we've had an incident of that kind, and its ramifications continue to, bedevil us. He was our ambassador there. And that story, but it's not the story of the IC 814. That's all over Indian newspapers, everything. But what could have been, and I stress the word could have been, because I've read his book, but maybe, but what could have been the factors behind that? I think you will all glean some perspectives. Sir, uh, evidence, etc., that's for them to ask you, but some perspectives to how that could have happened. Thirdly, what is this great thing that we look about in Nepal, etc.? Is this thing of fratricide? If I'm not mistaken, the only time before that was Caligula, where the entire royal family was wiped out. Nobody even knows about this. How did it happen? What happened? There are lots of theories. The simple one is the prince was besotted, this, that, and the other. That's fine. That there's no reason to disbelieve that. Ambassador Rajan's successor, who also we all happen to know very well, was having dinner when this happened. And actually, they just stepped out and went outside the Indian embassy, very close to the palace. I mean, not walking distance, but really not that far. There are many stories. There was a black helicopter roaming around. There are well-known people who say this. It brings people's biases. But please do read what Ambassador Rajan has to say. Again, these are perspectives. His perspectives, he was there, in touch, has a certain sense of ideas. I don't want to get into right or wrong, but I want you to understand how this complexity works. And finally, sir, I'm going to ask you to read one or two things, but you just said something about tighter border controls, and I'm reminded of this famous saying. Who is it? Robert Frost, isn't it? Who said, good fences make good neighbors. Really? Sir? Really? If we did that with Nepal, what do you think will be the implications? I'm not so sure. I have spent the last 4 years after my retirement, especially during the COVID days when, lots of things were happening, trying to actually dissociate myself with many in the Indian media scene here and to tell them, no, you guys are pretty wrong. That's not what is happening or the way you need to look at it because of the importance of this relationship. So let me make one simple point to you. Do you know the India-Nepal border is about 1,500 kilometers long in length? It's a lot of distance, sir. It is 4 times Delhi to Amritsar. That will sink in with all the Punjabi guys here. It's Delhi to Bombay. A flight from the eastern part of Nepal to the western part is longer than Delhi to Bombay. It's not a small little country. It's small by India-China comparison. At some 30 odd million people in Europe, it would be the 5th largest country. You understand all these things, your mind starts thinking a little differently. It also has a 1,400 kilometer long border with China. Let's remember that. And so it's about 100 kilometers wide, 1,400 kilometers this way, 1,500 kilometers this way. Now just think about what this means. Those of you who look at strategic affairs, defense, etc., again, please read this book because it alludes to things which are forgotten here in the Indian media. But very, very important to remember. Remember, For the Nepalese intelligentsia, their understanding of India has to be even better than the Indians' understanding of India. For obvious reasons, we take things for granted. I know you, sir. What is the problem? But they study you. And that's what makes many of these things a little complicated. The ideas of gratitude. I mean, I have often been asked, but why aren't they grateful? What answer do I give you? Nation states should be grateful. Come on, man. I haven't heard of that. I don't see any reason why that should happen. And finally, I'll leave one thought with you. And sir, I'm going to ask you now to read. Please open your book, sir. Read pages 76 and 77. They are about the way forward. And a couple of paragraphs that you mentioned without mentioning the individual who you have quoted. Because it's interesting to note. This book says reclaiming the relationship. I'll argue with them a bit. It's your relationship. We did a very big event. You know, the Nepal Investment Summit is taking place there today. 146 companies from India are participating. We did a pre-summit event here, and the Nepalese ambassador here was at that event, and this is what he had to say. And it's not to please any of us. He's their ambassador. Why did he have to say it? He could have egged us on a little bit. A simple thing to say, that please, all of you remember, even as of date, despite all what you hear, in terms of cumulative foreign investment into Nepal, more than 2/3 is from India. You know what the Chinese figure is? Is below 15%. Okay. This is what he said, not me. This is the reality. You know, trade, more than 2/3 of the trade is with India. More than 3/4 of their exports are to India. And I want to say something else to you finally. When you look at India's exports, any year, if you just look and you take a bit of a practical look of those figures along with what happens in the domestic market, it is very unlikely that Nepal will not be among the 5 top export destinations for Indian goods. And today, I dare say, services included. These are the realities of things. But I want to request Ambassador Rajan to read these couple of these paragraphs, because they tell you that, look, there is huge importance, but we also need to understand and adjust to modern reality. And what is it? I'll make one simple point to you, and that is globalization. We in India sit and talk and are very happy listening to de-globalization, etc. But till 1991, no Nepalese could get a passport, man. So they have no idea of anything called de-globalization. It's huge amount of globalization. Today, more than 25% of that population is outside Nepal, and I'm not including India. They are in every country in the world. Huge numbers in Australia, huge numbers in Japan and Korea, where there are very few Indians, by the way. Huge numbers in the US, huge numbers in Europe, all over the place. And in terms of remittances to GDP, it's among the 5 largest remittances to GDP ratios in the world. Their numbers is, of course, less than ours. We are a $3 trillion economy. They're a small little economy. That's the nature of this game. And lastly, sir, I'd just leave a thought for both Atul and you. You've covered lots. But would you not agree, sir, that much of what you've written is from an Indian lens, a little bit from the Nepalese lens, but frankly, perhaps the most important changes that are taking place in the country as a result of what I just said, globalization, is the advent of a completely different, our contiguous geography, power structure, or power influencers which have grown in Nepal. So, sir, I'm going to stop with your book. I want to say thank you very much for including me. Absolutely honored and delighted. But please tell people of what you have summarized ways forward. It's important because we must not just reclaim, we must claim it. Thank you, sir.
Or do you have to leave?
No, surveillance team.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. Now the session is open to Q&A.
You wanted to read?
Those of you who have a question to ask,
Why
kindly
don't you
raise
read
your
it?
hand.
I don't have my glasses on here.
You want to read? Okay.
Let me just read this for you. Let me just read this. All right. Ambassador Rajan quoting a senior member of the BJP, Ram Madhavji, says, our policies have been neighborhood first. Damn good, very good, excellent. But it would appear that these linkages are diminishing in terms of their appeal across the neighborhood. Why don't we instead focus on a very interesting concept, grow together? Think through this. Then he comes to something else, which is also very important, worth noting. I mentioned to you this thing about gratitude. Let me make this point and listen to this, what he writes. Nepal too is in the same boat in that respect. It needs to pay attention to India's intentions, to its advantages from agreements like the 1950 treaty, the Gujarat Doctrine, etc., etc. India does not fashion its policies on the basis of reciprocity expectation, but some reciprocity in terms of respect for vital interests is a necessary independent underpinning for sound relationships, particularly important. And let me say that with geography getting increasingly undermined by technology, it is perhaps important for the leadership in Nepal to understand and look at it. You know, I'll give you this little example that we are all talking about in the world today, the one which is on the front page of every newspaper for the last 2.5 years, sir, and I'm not talking about Gaza. At the end of the day, almost everyone asked the question, what was the leadership in that country doing? The others were playing their games. And that's the important element, at least the way I look at it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Puri. The book is available at a special rate, and the authors will be delighted to autograph the copies bought here. Yeah, the session is now open to Q&A. Those of you who have a question to ask, kindly raise your hand, wait for a microphone to come, identify yourself, and say who the question is directed at, and then we proceed.
Nepal is one situation which, appeals to everyone at the heart. That's why I would like to
Use the microphone. Press the button if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
माई सेल्फ डॉक्टर रेखा वाकई में किताब के बारे में बहुत ही फोकस चर्चा हुई और मंजीव पुरी जी ने जो संस्मरण बताए उसने किताब को और रोचक बना दिया। मैं ये जानना चाहूंगी कि राजन जी ऐसे रोचक प्रसंग आपको कौन से लग रहे हैं अपनी किताब में, वो आप भी बताएं तो ज्यादा अच्छा लगेगा। या
Interesting anecdotes. Your own.
and reminiscences like Manjeev Puri ji has
What
said.
is the anecdote which I would like to?
And any part which you want to read or anything?
No, there are too many of them. I'm sorry, I have to beg forgiveness. My mind is full of anecdotes. I can't select any one of them. There's far too many of them. All of them have a significance of their own. Maybe outside in the corridors we can have a chat on this.
It has been said that India and Nepal have very historical or close relation, like a first brother, and as Puriji has explained a lot. But now lots of some elements came out, which is making a lot of problem between India and Nepal bilateral relations. In your view, what is the issues, and what is the issues which can re-establish or re-strengthen the bilateral relation of India and Nepal, and strengthen, strengthen, I think I can say. Strengthen will be the more better. Strengthen and
Well, I think I would only echo what Ambassador Puri has said. We have to look to the future. You know, the cultural side, the linkages, the civilizational linkages are extremely important because nobody can compete as far as that is concerned. So that should never be taken for granted. but that should be leveraged. That should be leveraged along with new approaches, a greater sensitivity towards Nepal. A little bit more of empathy is needed. Most Indians, unfortunately, I have to say this with a lot of regret, they assume that Nepal is a kind of extension of India. In fact, during my own tenure, we had very well-known Indians who were visiting Nepal. Uh, I think one of the great actresses from, was it Madhuri Dixit?
Yes, yes.
She came, we were there at her function, and she said, India and Nepal are so close. After all, Nepal was once part of India. That night, the demonstration started.
Exactly, she said Nepal being the states, one of the states of India.
Yeah. And, we had to smuggle her out through the back door late at night.
Best of the relations.
Similarly, the then Chief Minister of Delhi, in front of the King and Queen of Nepal, he said, we all love Nepal. My cook is a Nepali, my guard is a Nepali. You could see from the king. And then you have uh, Indian tourists going to a restaurant and saying, Bahadur, ye lao. And you can see that expression on a person. Otherwise, Nepalese are such gentle people, such lovable people. But at the civil society level, as well as at the level of the government, there has to be greater sensitivity, greater empathy. I think people have to learn to understand what it is like to be in a small landlocked country with a country like India as a neighbor with an overwhelming influence over it. They have to constantly keep on asserting their identity, and they find it almost suffocating, the kind of embrace that they have to have with India. So we have to just understand, put ourselves in their position and understand them, and that will make a lot of difference. And then look to the future, as Ram Madhavji has rightly said. Let us grow together. That feeling of interdependence, that feeling of, now we are moving towards a different world order altogether, where it is not a derogatory expression to think of being a cog in a wheel. We ourselves are going to be a cog in some wheel or the other. Nepal should stop thinking of itself as a yam between two boulders. It can be a fast moving cog along with other fast moving wheels. And that will make an enormous amount of difference to future generations. So I think we have to change our mindsets. And I'm sure the Nepalese will be more than
That's
responsible.
I'm
for that.
asking what
Yeah.
we will have to do, India and Nepal will have to do. I'm asking Mr. Puri, point wise, just 1, 2, 3, 4 point is small, because the whole diplomatic and foreign policy have been turning towards the economic diplomacy and commercial diplomacy. Trade is playing very big role. So if we are talking, we have a historical relation and long relation. This is not what's existing. The important is the interest of the country, which is based on the commerce and other things. So what are the point wise? Because you explained very nicely and point wise. So what is the 2, 3, 4 point which India and Nepal should have to work for the abolishment of the confusions which has created recently?
Sir, I don't know about abolishing the confusions because, nahi, aisa as a,
Clarification of the
no clarification, nothing. But you strengthen the ties that it's all right to have confusion, but you need to actually act with each other. That's the important element. Confusion, and in the middle of the night, you can have all kinds of confusions. So the answer is actually, लेकिन जिंदगी चलेगी बिना this or not? That's something you should be clear. जब दिन के समय बिना confusion चल रहे हो, you should realize that man, life doesn't move without this happening. What should we do? I am very clear in my mind. India is by far that economic partner of Nepal, which is automatic for Nepal to feel comfortable in. Nepalese bank needs software, it uses Indian software. Nepalese want to work somewhere quietly, they work in India. You need medical, you do whatever. We should ease trade, we should ease investment flows, we should encourage far better connectivity. When I was growing up, I'd been to Nepal as a student soon after I passed out of my school. And before I joined college, there used to be 6 months in those days. The two of us hitchhiked from here. We didn't have enough money. Otherwise, the cheapest flight was from Patna to Kathmandu. There's no such flight in the last 30 years. You know, we have changed. Narrow gauge is out in India. Today, some ATRs are being introduced, but we have these large, big Boeing aircraft. They don't land in small strips. We need to ensure that we have the benefit of connectivity. Sitting in some ministries here, and I think that is quoted by you, sir, about Sri Pranab Mukherjee and his understanding of how bureaucracies work. A very simple ones. Arey, how can you open it for them? Pata nahi kya ho jayega? Kya ho jayega? What will the Nepalese economy, even if it indulges in the most violent of violations of trade agreement, what will it do to the Indian economy? But you build these relationships, and we must. I am happy to say that during my times there, two things happened. The oil pipeline was laid. Do you know the entire bane of India-Nepal relations were these things called blockades? After you have a pipeline, you can't have a blockade. It's the end of the matter because you can't blame it on anyone. It becomes known. Secondly, no, we started the railway. No, that's not the thing. Secondly, the entire business with Nepal for the last 30 years, since Ambassador Rajan's time, has been predicated on this thing called hydropower. Perhaps none of you know, but the oldest hydropower station in South Asia was built in Nepal at the turn of the last century. It's a small little station. It's kamre ke liye bhi batti nahi dega. But that kind of stuff. And the largest thing was hydropower, and we built nothing. Nobody was ever allowed. But we started this project called Arun 3, which will do 2 projects of 900 megawatts. It will change the nature of the Nepalese economy at a particular point with the kind of exports that will take place to India. My simple point is this, and let me laugh and say this. This is the second book on Nepal written by experts, released in the last couple of months. The books have come right up to 2024, what has happened. I served as ambassador there for 3 full years, 17, 18, and 19. There's no mention of it. Either we got everything wrong or sir, pata nahi kya hua tha. So thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, Ambassador. The Ambassador Puri has to catch a plane to go someplace. So I want to thank him for accepting our invitation and joining this discussion. Simran has a question.
So, Ambassador Rajan, I wanted to ask you a little about China. We've been discussing Nepal, and China has not been discussed enough, I feel. Do you get the sense that a lot of policymakers get that China is actually a serious concern for us when it comes to the neighborhood, especially Nepal? We've seen the Chinese overtures. How much of a worry is China for India in Nepal?
I think China is a matter of very serious concern because they have come out now in the open. Earlier, in the early stages, their main concern was Tibet and not to allow Tibetan refugees to cross over to Nepal, etc. Later, it was an economic interest. They wanted to. But they basically took a low profile during my tenure, for example. And when all these terrible things were happening, diplomats from Pakistan were being exposed, counterfeit currency smuggling was being exposed, and hijacking took place, etc., etc. The Chinese kept a low profile and were totally neutral. Today, it is very different. The Chinese Chinese diplomats are publicly warning Nepal that they are unfortunate. They have the bad luck of having a country like India as a neighbor, and they should watch out, etc., etc. They are openly interfering in Nepal's internal affairs. For example, they had been calling for the unity of all the left forces, the Maoists and the UML, which were earlier together, but then they split. And the Chinese publicly, they sent special envoys at the party level to urge them to stay together. Today, they are the ones who are the most satisfied because the leftist forces have come together. And in a sense, the Chinese have worked very closely with parties on the extreme left and also parties, forces on the extreme right in the past. And today there is a revival of the left and there is also a revival of the extreme right because people are getting disenchanted with democracy and so on. So there is an agitation which is slowly building up uh, for a return of Nepal to its Hindu identity, which is that particular uh, um, urge, I think, is strong. And there is also a movement which is slowly building up for a return of the monarchy. Now, the Chinese would be very happy with both these developments. I think the Chinese are deadly serious about undermining India's influence. And, earlier it used to be said that the theory that China was trying to have a string of pearls uh, around India to sort of contain India was a figment of our imagination, a figment of somebody's imagination. Today, unfortunately, nobody can say that. We know what is happening in the Maldives. We know, for example, who is behind a lot of anti-India agitations taking place in other neighboring countries. I think, and after the latest developments took place in Nepal, with Mr. Prachanda, the incumbent prime minister, suddenly changing his coalition partners and going back to his old alliance with the second largest party of former Prime Minister Oli. The first visit that took place from the Nepalese government side was to China. There have been exchanges at the military level, etc., etc. The Chinese at the moment are deliberately keeping a slightly lower profile. They're trying hard not to get into any controversy. But I think they are very, very serious. For them, now India has to be contained, um, and they will try everything that they can to make sure that they can gain in terms of their influence. Now, I would not say that should be a matter of any great alarm for India because it's a different ballgame altogether today. The kind of situation that we faced in the late 90s, for example, was that you had Pakistan, China, maybe a little bit of North Korea, the Chinese keeping a low profile, etc., etc. Today, you have the Indo-Pacific, you've got the Quad, you've got Western powers, you've got a very assertive India saying that if other people are not willing to play by the rules of the game, why should we? So that is why it is something that should encourage us to believe that there is no cause for alarm, but it should also be a warning that suddenly there could be a development or a series of developments which could make this situation go out of control. You don't know where things can go once things begin to go wrong. So India just has to be extra careful, extra alert. We should just carry on the way we are doing. I think we are playing our cards very well in Nepal at the moment, staying out of controversy, working with all the players, concentrating on development and delivery of all the agreements that have been signed. And I'm very happy that even the new government in Nepal has endorsed the very important agreements that were reached for 10,000 megawatts of hydropower export to India from Nepal. So the new government has also endorsed that. So basically, I think there is now a move towards greater pragmatism, a politicization of the India-Nepal relationship, which we should focus on. The Chinese, in fact, have been making the same kind of mistakes that we used to make in the old days. They have exposed themselves. They have been intrusive, and they are seen as being rather self-serving. The kind of exhortation they are making to Nepal on the Belt and Road Initiative, etc., etc. I would say the Chinese image has been dented, and there is a greater amount of respect and credibility attached to relations with India. But there is no room for complacency. I think it is going to be a matter of concern for some time.
Hello, good evening, all of you. Myself, SS Dogra. I am bureau for a magazine called Himalaya from Nepal. I'm bureau from Delhi. My question for both of the author is, what is the expectations of Nepal and Nepal government from Indian people as well as Indian government? Have you covered that chapter also in this book? This is my question for both of you.
I think the basic expectation would be on uh, helping Nepal to achieve speedy, inclusive development. The stress is really now on development. Uh, but at the same time, uh, a greater sensitivity from on the part of the Indian people as well as the government of India to Nepal's um yearning for more respect for its own sovereignty and for its own identity. I think they do want, they are yearning for a sense of equality, not in an arithmetical sense, but in the sense of a sovereign, independent nation. I think that is something that they do expect from the government of India and the people of India. And the sooner that can be demonstrated, the better it will be for both the countries. Atul would like to say something.
Thank you, sir. I'm aware about Himalayan magazine. I have been writing for Kathmandu Post for almost last 13 years. So I know it's a Hindi publication from, it's in Hindi, I think, Himalayan. Yeah. So in great detail, we have dealt with the transitions in section 2 and section 3. Section 3 is about repurposing the bilateral ties. So as far as the expectations are concerned, these are not permanent. This keeps changing with the political fluctuations. And Nepal is, I will not say it's in a precarious condition, but it keeps hosting the fluctuations, political fluctuations. Sometime out of compulsion, sometime out of choice. So, and sir has pointed on a few very important, subjects. Like China is doing the same mistakes which we did in the past. That's the crux of today's discussion. So we and our inside Delhi's foreign policy circle. Now this whole ecosystem is alert towards China's intentions in Nepal. Nepal is very much part of their encircling policy, the string of pearls, as sir has mentioned, and CSCP movement is just taking place in Nepal. This is something which is very, very serious. And Nepalese government, irrespective of who is ruling the roost there, should be very doing too much dealing with China. Yes. Mhm. Yes, they have. Yes. Yes, yes. Yes, so section 3. Yes. Very good. Your neighborhood first has been a key policy driver of this government. So we have to give the genuine credit for that matter. Section 3 deals with that. We know that where the problem is, that complexity of having big brother, small brother, brother syndrome, and many other things. But complementarity is something which is being practiced as well when it comes to India. India knows the needs of Nepal, but not necessarily every time the reciprocation happens. So this is the concept. Yes, yes,
Agree
sir.
to this. You know, you are probably not here when I was making these points, but Nepal is going through a very difficult transition. And in the months to come, I think India may be drawn into the decision-making process that the Nepalese people and Nepalese government or Nepalese political leadership have to take. It's very important that India should not try and project its own preferences or its own biases, because this has happened too often in the past, where you know, Nepal welcomes India's advice because India's intentions have always been good and in Nepal's interest. But sometimes there are individual biases, individual prejudices, and the desire to have certain outcomes which may or may not ultimately turn out to be the best possible solution. You know, the other day, Dr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister, was saying, he was referring to India-China relations in the 50s when he said that there were two routes that were available. It's not that there was no alternative. There were other alternatives, but a particular route was chosen by India, which turned out uh, to be not in India's interest. Similarly, in the case of Nepal, more than once, what has happened is that India has selected a particular option as the preferred option, and the Nepalese sometimes, against their own judgment, against their own preference, have gone along because they trust India. And they feel that it is in Nepal's interest to go along with what India thinks is a good idea. And sometimes that has turned out to be not the wisest decision. And one example that I would dare to give is that when Nepalese political leaders looked to India for advice uh, when the Maoists were still active as insurgents fighting from the jungle hideouts here. What the Maoists really wanted was an immediate transition from an a monarchy, from a Hindu state to a secular federal republic. But Nepal was simply not prepared for that. And many Nepalese political leaders had some reservations privately. But India felt that the time had come. Uh, and they had their own problem with their own Maoists. So they had to resolve this problem of the Maoist insurgency in Nepal. And Nepalese political leaders went along with that judgment, although privately they thought that they were really, Nepal is just not prepared institutionally to become a secular federal democracy overnight. But this is what happened, and the result is there has been a long and painful transition, which has cost the people of Nepal so much. So this sort of experience, and this has happened, similar things have happened in the past. I think this is something which we should avoid. Uh, it should be left to the people of Nepal to decide what they want to do. And India should just simply try and support whatever the people of Nepal want. I think that would be the best outcome.
Do you foresee, sorry, you have a question? Please go ahead.
Sir, I am Surinder Verma from Chandigarh. I have been, I am Surinder Verma from Chandigarh. I have been invited by Mr. Dogra. My simple question is, Nepal is considered to be a Hindu state. So does any political situation impact Nepal? Yes. That is considered to be. That is considered to be a Hindu state.
I think, Nepal is a very, very deeply religious nation, deeply religious. They are a very deeply religious people. So it came as a huge surprise to them, and a handful of parliamentarians decided that it should become secular. Now, I've written about this, I think we have written about it in the book also. Nepal's Hindu identity was actually a very tolerant, secular ethos. There had never been communal riots in Nepal, etc., etc. Unfortunately, the other day we started seeing communal riots in Nepal, etc. And I remember Sir Mark Tully writing many years ago that one of the biggest mistakes that the Congress party in India made was to agree to India becoming secular in the Western sense. Because religion is something, faith is something that you can't take away from people simply because it is seen as a matter of political convenience or a matter to be negotiated between politicians. Faith is something which is very important. I'm not talking about organized religion. I'm talking about faith. And the Nepalese will continue to be deeply religious by whatever name you call the nation. So I think there is an urge uh, to maintain its identity, its religious identity. It is not something which is a political matter. It is something which Nepal has to decide. The people of Nepal have to decide through whatever mechanisms they decide to be appropriate. And India should respect that. I don't think India needs to try and project a particular uh, form of religious identity which Nepal should have. It would be wonderful if Nepal continued to maintain its identity, but in a spirit of tolerance for all religions. You know, Gandhi is the best example. Gandhi was a deeply religious man, but his whole attitude was that by respecting other religions, you are a better Hindu. You can be a deeply religious Hindu, but you must respect all religions. And he was the one who thought of, changing the wording of that wonderful bhajan, Raghupati Raghav Raja Ram, where he said, Ishwar Allah Tero Naam, that God and Allah are your name. No, he changed that. His idea was that you must respect all religions. Now, that is true religion, that is true faith in its finest form. And I hope, as one who had a lot of respect and a lot of, who has a lot of love for the kind of religious freedom that you had, if you always had in Nepal, that should continue. It should not be something, which divides people. Religion should not be something which divides people. It should be something which unites people and gives them a sense of converging towards the same goal of spiritual enrichment rather than anything else. So that is my hope. And I think that is something which is true to the spirit of religion in Nepal.
In Kathmandu, Darbar Road. That mosque is bigger than our Jama Masjid in Delhi. So I don't think they are just fixed to a religion because Hindu religion is open for every religion, and that is the beauty of our
Well,
uh,
if you
Indians and
if
our.
you read our book, you will find uh, that King Birendra um, began to have a lot of anxiety about Nepal's Hindu identity in terms of its tolerance being adversely affected by really imported fundamentalist ideas. Uh, because all over the border, uh, along the border, you had a proliferation of some of these mosques and so on that came up. And the intention behind that was not religion. The intention behind that was really to infiltrate arms and terrorists and so on and so forth. And Birendra was very, very deeply worried about it. And that is why he began to think that it was very important for Nepal's Hindu identity to be protected. And that is why certain people who were really thriving on some of these activities along the border, smuggling, etc., etc., they became very worried. The nexus, the smuggling nexus, the terrorist-related nexus, they thought that if the monarchy, they felt very uncomfortable with Nepal's Hindu identity. And they felt that if the monarchy began to increase in its popularity, if the monarchy became closer to India, uh, and ultimately if the monarchy also began to develop links with the Maoists, because a time came when the monarchy also and the Maoists were reaching out to each other, they thought that their own future in Nepal was in danger. And the problem with this nexus is that it ceases to have any national identity. You can see it everywhere, all over the world. Once you have a smuggling nexus, which becomes an industry, the other day, Dr. Jaishankar, foreign minister, said that Pakistan must be one of the few countries in the world where terrorism is an industry. Terrorism was an industry even then. And then it ceases to have any national identity because they have very long arms that reach out to India, reach out to Southeast Asia, reach out to China, and it becomes an industry which has its own raison d'etre, as it were. Unfortunately, that was what was happening at that time. Till the monarchy in Nepal, political parties, the intelligence agencies all woke up and decided to put an end to these activities. And I think now Nepal is at a stage where the Maoists also realize that you cannot think of a Nepal without any religion when it is such a deeply religious country. So I think Atul, even Prachanda, the Prime Minister, has begun to show his respect for religion. He cannot deny that religion has its own importance. Would you like to add anything?
So, Comrade Prachanda used to say that India is the Swambhu in relationship with Nepal. Now he is himself a believer of Swambhu, the power of Swambhu. So, demographic changes are living realities in Nepal. And unfortunately, after the royal mistake, that good initiative possibly would have started by King Brendra lasted in no time. And the monarchy, as we all are aware, ended in hurry, very unfortunate manner. There used to be less than 1% population of Muslims, though Nepal was always a multi-religious, multi-ethnic society. But now, Nepal has a luxury of not having data, credible data, even to the date. Otherwise, if there will be true census, the population of Muslims will be not less than 6-7%. Even it will go into double digit. So that's a serious concern. And it's not about having a particular section growing to that level. It's, as Sir has said, that is part of the industry, tourism industry. Those who have been inhabitants of Nepal have been marginalized, even from Muslim communities. I come from Madhya side. I'm from Madhubani, Bihar. I have relatives across the borders. I have seen those changes. I have some people sitting here who are from exactly near the borders. They will tell you what changes are taking place. We know even those original inhabitants by name, by their families. Wonderful people. Such harmonious relationship has been existing. But there are new set of people there. That's something very troubling. Very troubling. This is not about religion or anything. This is something else. The book deals in detail about all these matters. And the book precisely deals with Pakistan. The book is also about Pakistan, not only about China and Nepal. Whenever you will read it, you will come to realize.
May I ask the last question? How long do you think the Chinese and the Indians? Okay. How long do you think the Indians and the Chinese will fight a turf war in Nepal and South Asia as a whole? Do you ever see the possibility of China and India working together? Do you see the possibility of the trans-Himalayan rail track materializing and people from Delhi can take a train, go to Kathmandu and then to Lhasa? Will that be ever possible?
I think that's a very, very important question, and that is not a question which should be dismissed as something which is far-fetched, because ultimately, I think India and China also have some common long-term interests. They are the two giants in Asia which can make the Asian century happen. And I think it's only a question of time before uh, both India and China have to, this is my personal view, they both have to adjust their respective positions and realize that they have to live together in peace because otherwise, I think the future is going to be very bleak, not only for both of them, but for the continent. And I personally think that in the not too distant future, India and China will find that kind of modus vivendi because we are living in such a fluid situation in the world today. You have a very strange situation where India and the United States are supposed to be strategic partners, but they are also sparring with each other on democracy, on human rights, on the Khalistani related activities which are taking place from the US soil. Same thing with India and Canada. We are all supposed to be part of the Indo Pacific, etc. So it is a situation where, you know, new understandings are being reached wherever possible. And ultimately, the goal is going to be for a more peaceful world order. It may take a while. We may go through worse times before that happens. But I'm an optimist by nature, and I've had many interactions with Chinese diplomats over the years, including when I was in Kathmandu. And I found that individually, the Chinese also realize this. And they also have a certain respect for India. They also have a certain sentiment for India. It is simply that the system has evolved in such a way that the Middle Kingdom sort of notion is prevailing over the desire to have a normal, peaceful relation with India. I think it's only a question of time, and a more reasonable sort of situation will emerge in the months and years to come.
The last question.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Savita Singh. I am a lawyer in Supreme Court. It's a very enlightening discussion here. My question relates to the last discussion uh, Sir K.V. Rajan and Atul Thakur had. The You mentioned in one of the incidents that in 2001, the whole entire kingdom, the concern of King Virendra Singh, the concern of Virendra Singh to kind of cling on to the religious and cultural identity of the country of Nepal. You also mentioned one incident of 2001 in a family feud or some, the entire family was wiped out, killed in some family feud. You mentioned that this incident must be also seen through the prism of international game also. So would you like to elaborate on this? You 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 had you had said in your introductory discussion. So my question is that does that incident also reflect in the book? And if you could elaborate on this, that what was the international game in that incident? Yes.
I've made it very clear as to who was responsible, what were the forces that were responsible, and I alluded to it a little earlier also. I think smuggling and terrorism had become such a huge industry across the open border that it was posing a threat to the monarchy. It was a posing threat to better relations between the monarchy and India, and it was also posing a threat to India. There were a series of activities, and the king, as I've explained in the book, although he had lost all power and he was a constitutional monarch, he still had the army with him. He was doing his best to discreetly help in trying to expose the people who were responsible. And the industry felt threatened by that. Now, as it happened, there was a family problem, and there was a transition that was being discussed. Uh, the Maoists were thinking that while they were against the monarchy, the institution could continue in a different form. And one of the suggestions was that the king could continue as the president. It was just an idea. It had not been discussed. It was going to be discussed. But somehow, an exaggerated version of this reached the crown prince. And there were front companies which are very well known, which have been named. And the head of that particular front company was also assassinated by a rival gang in Nepal shortly thereafter, which was quite close to the crown prince, and which fed this idea that he was going to lose everything. Not only was he going to lose, uh, he was hoping to marry a particular lady, and it was known that his parents were against that. So not only was that not going to be allowed, but his whole future was in danger and in doubt because the king, he was told wrongly, falsely, was going to be just a ceremonial president. And King Birendra was basically at heart uh, a person who desired peace, who was a man who wanted accommodation with, he was in a minority when he agreed to become a constitutional monarch within his own family. His brother was against it, his wife was against it, but he was the one who said, "No, I don't want to see this popular movement against the monarchy continue." And he said, "I'll become a constitutional monarch." So it was assumed that he would also agree to become a ceremonial president, uh, and the Maoists would be brought on board. And there was a vague talk about a three-pillar formula in which India would support the Maoists so that they could be mainstreamed. It would support the monarchy in a constitutional form, and it would support democracy. And a lot of things happened. I've described it in the book, which led to his becoming, going totally out of control. It was happening over a period of time. And the king was looking for help. He didn't know where to turn, for help. And so this particular tragedy occurred. I think when you read the book, you'll see the details.
So, most strikingly, Maoists were not against working with King Birendra. Just they were about to reach an agreement, sir. We have written in the book. And even after the death of King Birendra, they allowed Queen Ratna Rajalakshmi to stay in Narayanhiti Palace. Even to the date she lives there. My friend from Maoist camp is here. He can tell you more about the reason why. But Maoists were not really against the institution of monarchy. That's a striking fact. And they were supposed to work together. But in the meantime, something happened by the outside forces. And you will read the story in the book.
May I invite Simran to propose a vote of thanks and then present mementos to our guests.
Mike, please, yeah, louder.
One really small question. Which do you think was the biggest factor in the massacre at the palace? Was it the love story that didn't happen, or was it the political machinations which might have deprived the crown prince of the throne? Which do you think was the strongest factor?
Well, beyond a certain point, it would be very risky to speculate. But too many unanswered questions. And what is fairly clear is that there was a front company which had managed to get close to the crown prince, which had got him into a kind of addiction with very dangerous drugs, which would change his personality and he would become very violent when he was under the influence of those drugs combined with certain other things. And the king was getting increasingly worried. Some of his other close friends were getting increasingly worried. So I'm afraid the final question that remains after the massacre took place, there was no post-mortem, there was no real investigation. Everything was covered up, everything was hush hush, and the whole matter was closed. But as to where the final responsibility lay, that has to be a matter of speculation. I'm afraid I can't. We might have our own views, but it is better not to
There
speculate.
is something inside the book.
Sorry?
But there is something inside the book. There's
Good evening, Ambassador Rajan. It's always a pleasure to listen to you, and your insight into Nepal is matchless. I happened to be in Kathmandu when the royal massacre took place, and I'm just hearing you with a lot of attention. And I feel that what I heard at that time was that the members of the royal family, enjoyed some kind of royal immunity, so they did not go through postmortem. I'm not sure if that's correct, and there was a palace insider who told me this, and I also heard that the choice of the hospital where members of the royal family were taken was not appropriate because they needed what is called immediate treatment in the golden hour, which they clearly missed. So I don't know why that happened.
As I said, there are too many unanswered questions. The whole thing uh, looked very superficial after the massacre took place. The disposal of the bodies, the absence of any kind of post-mortem, the absence of any kind of serious investigation. Uh, but partly the reason is, as you very rightly said, that the royal family was supposed to have immunity from prosecution. Um, I think, frankly, beyond that, it's a matter of pure speculation as to why certain things were done or not done. I think we have to just leave it at that, that there is a huge question mark uh, as to where the final responsibility lies. And even in the case of the crown prince, frankly, there is a big question mark because it was, you must have heard it since you were there at that time. He was supposed to be uh, a right-hander, but he was supposed to have shot himself on the left side, right? It makes very little sense. And he was allowed to go in and out of the room and come back, with his gun reloaded in order to shoot more and more people. I mean, the whole thing looks bizarre. There were security people all over the place, etc., etc. We don't know why certain things happened, but there are question marks there. I think that's all that one can say.
From all of us here at the Foreign Correspondents Club, Ambassador Rajan and Mr. Thakur, thank you so much for coming here, for being with us, and for a very interesting discussion. This has been streamed live on the Facebook and the Twitter page of FCC. The discussion will be saved in the archives section of the FCC Facebook page. So if any of you want to go back and visit it, it will be there. And once again, thank you so much for coming here and spending this time with us. It has been a wonderful session. Thank you.